Have you ever found yourself feeling frustrated because someone didn't help you, but then realized you never actually asked? Or perhaps you found yourself thinking, if they really cared about me, they would just know what I need. If you've ever felt disappointed, resentful, or even lonely because the people around you weren't meeting your needs, then today's episode is going to help you feel better and get what you want. One of the most important skills in healthy relationships isn't mind reading, it's learning how to ask. Unfortunately, for many of us, asking feels uncomfortable. We worry about being a burden, being rejected, looking needy, or starting an argument. So instead of asking, we stay quiet and just hope someone notices. Today, I'd like to explore why asking feels so difficult for so many of us, the hidden cost of staying silent, and the 6 simple ways to ask for what you need in a way that strengthens your relationships instead of creating conflict. Kia ora and hello. Welcome to the Living Midlife Well Podcast. I'm Janine Lattimore, a wellbeing coach here to help people in midlife get off the treadmill of stress and exhaustion, rediscover their joy, and create a life that is aligned with who they really are and what they really want. If you're new here, a very warm welcome. And if you've listened before, thank you so much for joining me again. Just a little admin note before we dive in. If you are a regular listener, from the next episode, I'm going to move my podcast hosting to a new platform. So if you lose me in the move, just search up Janine Lattimore Living Midlife Well in your regular listening platform and I will pop up again. Okay, let's get into it. Have you ever found yourself feeling frustrated that someone didn't help, didn't notice, or didn't do something that seemed completely obvious to you? Perhaps you've thought, if they really cared, they would just know what I want. The truth is, even the people who love us most cannot read our minds. One of the simplest yet hardest skills in healthy relationships is learning to ask clearly for what we need. For many of us, asking feels uncomfortable because it stirs up fears of rejection, conflict, or being seen as needy or nagging. Yet when we don't ask, our needs often go unmet, resentment quietly grows, and relationships become harder than they need to be. Learning to ask isn't about becoming demanding. It's about becoming honest, clear, and connected. I'd like to begin by sharing a little of my own story because I think it explains why this topic has become so important to me. Apparently, I was quite feisty as a young child. My auntie would tell me stories of the arguments that I used to have with her. In my pre-teens, I loved public speaking and debating in particular. I was free-spirited and free-speaking. By puberty, life had knocked most of that out of me, and I became full of fear. Fear of rejection, fear of being told off, fear of getting things wrong, fear of being judged, fear of disappointing people. I became a people pleaser. I became compliant. I became accommodating. I learned to rely on myself and to be resourceful. I would take on all sorts of things by myself and go without all sorts of things because I felt so uncomfortable asking people for anything. When I had children, that shifted a little because I often needed to get things as efficiently as possible. For example, I would walk into a store and go straight up to someone who worked there and ask for what I wanted because I didn't have the time or energy to browse stores trying to find things myself. Even so, while I felt okay to ask for things for my children, I still didn't feel okay to ask for things for myself. I would brush off offers of help or support, not that there were that many because I appeared so self-sufficient. I had a big fear of being seen as a nagging wife, so I avoided asking my husband to do things and would just do everything myself. Then, in my early 40s, I crashed. First, my body collapsed under all the stress I had been experiencing and creating. Then my second marriage collapsed, and along with it, the life I had known for about 15 years. But I still tried to struggle along without asking for help. Looking back now, I can see that asking wasn't really the problem. The problem was everything I believed asking meant. Somewhere along the way, I'd learned that asking wasn't safe. Maybe you can relate to some of that. Perhaps your story is completely different from mine, but underneath it all, you've also learned to stay quiet, do everything yourself, or avoid asking because it just feels uncomfortable. If that's you, you're certainly not the only one. As I reflected on my own experiences, I realized something interesting. Most of us aren't taught how to ask. In fact, many of us are taught exactly the opposite. We're taught not to ask. We are told or learn through experience that asking is impolite, annoying, or a sign of weakness or ignorance. We become fearful of being rejected, ridiculed, or disappointed. To avoid those uncomfortable feelings, we refrain from asking for things, especially if the answer might be no. We begin to attach all sorts of meanings to the act of asking, and it becomes tied to a lot of uncomfortable emotions. It is also tied to unworthiness, which keeps us from allowing ourselves to receive. In my mid-40s, when I began my journey to truly love myself, one of the first things I noticed as I began to feel a greater sense of self-worth was that I also began to feel much more comfortable asking for and receiving help. And I think that's a really interesting connection. The more we value ourselves, the more comfortable we become both expressing our needs and receiving the kindness and support that other people genuinely want to give us. In the next part of today's episode, I'd like to explore some of the most common reasons we avoid asking for help or support. As I read through them, I invite you not to judge yourself, but just to notice which ones resonate. You might even discover a belief you've been carrying around for years without ever realizing it. I've had a few aha moments of my own as I did the research for this article and podcast. Over the years, I've spoken to many people who struggle with asking, and although our personal experiences are different, the beliefs underneath them are often remarkably similar. Most of us don't avoid asking because we don't need anything. We avoid asking because we've learned that asking feels emotionally risky. Over time, we develop beliefs that make it easier to stay silent than to speak up. As I read through this list of beliefs, I wonder if you'll recognize yourself in one or two of these, or maybe more. You don't have to agree with all of them. Just notice which ones quietly make you think, yes, that's me. Here we go. You don't want to be a burden. You don't want to seem needy. You don't want to be seen as bossy, nagging, demanding, or controlling. You don't want to start an argument. You don't want to be rejected. You don't want to disappoint other people. You don't want people to think you're weak or incapable. You feel guilty putting your own needs first and don't want to look selfish. You think it's obvious what needs to be done, especially when it comes to household jobs. You assume other people should already know what you need. If they loved me, they'd just know. You believe that if you have to ask, then somehow the response is less genuine. You've learned to rely only on yourself. You don't believe you're worthy of receiving help. You fear owing someone something in return. You don't want to inconvenience anyone. You've been criticized or rejected when you've asked before. And the one I hear very often, you think it's simply easier to do it yourself. Now, if you recognized yourself in that list, I want you to notice something. Almost every one of those reasons is based on a belief, not necessarily a fact, a belief. Many of them have grown out of painful experiences we've had in the past. Someone rejected us, someone criticized us, someone dismissed us, Or perhaps we simply absorbed messages growing up about what a good person does or doesn't do. Over time, those experiences become stories that we carry with us into adulthood. Stories like, I'm a burden, I shouldn't need help, good people don't ask for things, people will think less of me if I ask. The interesting thing is that stories aren't necessarily truths. They can be questioned, they can be challenged. One of my favorite questions to ask myself is simply, is this actually true? Not, does it feel true? Because those are two very different questions. Feelings are real, but they don't always tell us the truth. One example is our fear of hearing the word no. For many of us, hearing no feels deeply personal. It feels like rejection. But if we stop and look at it logically and objectively, whether someone replies yes or no is simply the answer to a question. It's information, nothing more. The emotional meaning is something we add to it. Think about dating for a moment. If you asked someone out and they said no, of course you would probably feel disappointed. That's completely understandable. But their response is actually information about their preferences. It isn't proof that you are somehow inadequate or not worthy of love. Yet so often that's the story we tell ourselves. We translate no thank you into I'm not good enough. Those are two completely different messages. One is a response to a request. The other is a judgment about ourselves that we've created. And learning to separate those two things is incredibly freeing, because once we stop attaching our worth to other people's responses, asking becomes much less frightening. It becomes what it really is, an honest conversation. And that's a much healthier foundation for any relationship. So now that we've explored some of the beliefs that stop us asking, let's look at something that often surprises people. We tend to think staying quiet keeps the peace. But in reality, not asking often creates far bigger problems than asking ever would. We think that by not asking, we're avoiding conflict, avoiding disappointment, or avoiding being a burden. But the reality is often the exact opposite. At this point, I would like to say that if you're finding this episode interesting or helpful, then please give it a like. And if you want to hear more episodes like this about living midlife well, then please click to subscribe. Thank you. Now, one way to manage our limiting beliefs and stories about asking is to reflect on whether they are actually rationally true. We can also ask ourselves another important question. Do these beliefs serve my highest good? Because asking is a key part of learning, growing, receiving, and building meaningful relationships with other people. When we avoid asking, there can actually be some very significant consequences. For example, we can become exhausted from doing everything ourselves. We build resentment towards people who didn't even know we needed something. Our relationships become one-sided. People assume we're coping because we never say otherwise. We miss opportunities to receive love and kindness. We feel lonely, even when we're surrounded by people. We become overwhelmed. Small frustrations gradually build into major conflicts. We expect other people to read our minds and to just notice. We rob other people of the opportunity to help us. We reinforce the belief that we have to do everything alone. We become less connected to the people we love. Our needs remain unmet. We model unhealthy relationship patterns to our children and grandchildren, and perhaps saddest of all, we slowly lose our voice. I'd like you to pause for a moment and think about that last one. We slowly lose our voice. I think that is a painful experience that many of us in midlife can relate to. And it doesn't usually happen from one traumatic event. It happens over a lifetime of shutting ourselves down. the requests we don't make, the opinions we don't share, the needs we quietly push aside, until one day we realize we've become experts at looking after everyone else and strangers to ourselves. I know that feeling, and perhaps you do too. If that's where you are, I want to encourage you. Finding your voice doesn't begin with making huge demands or having difficult confrontations. It begins with one honest conversation, one small request, one moment of allowing yourself to believe my needs matter too. It is somewhat wonderfully ironic that some of the biggest reasons people avoid asking is because they want to avoid conflict. Yet in reality, not asking is often one of the biggest causes of conflict in personal relationships. Think about it for a moment. One of the reasons we become annoyed with people is because they trespass on one or more of our needs or values. But usually they've done that unintentionally. They didn't know, because we never actually asked for that need to be met or for that value to be respected. The same thing happens with expectations. We become frustrated because someone hasn't met one of our expectations. But have we actually communicated that expectation clearly to them? Or have we simply assumed they knew or dropped hints? I think this is something almost all of us do from time to time. We assume the people closest to us know us so well that they'll naturally understand what we need. After all, they're our partner, our children, our parents, our closest friends. Surely they know us by now. But here's the truth. No matter how much someone loves you, no matter how empathic they are, no one can read your mind. Everyone has their own thoughts, their own feelings, their own life experiences, their own priorities, and their own blind spots. They're living life through their own eyes, not yours. And I think remembering that can completely change the way we communicate. Instead of expecting people to somehow magically know what we need, we can simply tell them. One sentence really sums this up for me. I don't know what you really want unless you ask me. Imagine how many misunderstandings, disappointments, and arguments could be avoided if we all remembered that simple truth. Healthy relationships aren't built on mind reading. They're built on honest conversations. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about next. So we've explored why asking feels difficult. We've looked at the hidden cost of staying silent. Now let's make this practical. How do you actually ask for what you need in a way that feels respectful, honest, and effective? I understand the fear of asking on a deep personal level. I know that it can seem really hard. I know how words can seem to stick in your throat, come out wrong, or not get the response you were hoping for. I also know from experience that practice and having a simple framework to follow can make all the difference. If you find it hard to ask other people for things, then start practicing with small requests that don't have a lot of emotional charge for you or the other person. This will help you to become more comfortable asking for support and assistance, and over time it will build your confidence to start making requests about your deeper desires and emotional needs. What I'd like to share with you next is a simple 6-step process that has really helped me. Step 1 and 2 are likely things you haven't thought about doing before, and step 4 and 5 give you the keys to how to ask in a way that other people are likely to respond positively to. For easy reference, I've also created a phone wallpaper checklist of the 6 steps, and I will put a link in the description for where you can access that for free. Here are the 6 steps. Step 1. Get clear about what you need. Before you ask someone else, ask yourself. If you are not clear about what you want, then other people won't be either. When our needs are not met, we often feel upset or frustrated, and we get caught up in the emotion. Those emotions also become stronger the longer we put off asking for what we want. At the same time, all sorts of stories begin clouding our thinking, or we simply become more tired and stressed because we are trying to do everything ourselves instead of asking for help. As soon as you notice frustration, stress, or disappointment beginning to churn inside you, pause, take a breath, then gently ask yourself, what exactly am I wanting? Or what exactly am I expecting? I think these are two incredibly powerful questions because they move us away from blame and towards self-awareness. Sometimes we discover that we haven't actually been clear with ourselves, and that's okay. Clarity is the first gift we give ourselves before we ask anything of someone else. When you understand what you truly want, need, or expect, it becomes much easier to make a clear request to someone else. Step 2. Acknowledge the fear before you ask. Now that you know what you need, the next challenge is often the fear that comes up about actually asking for it. Most personal development advice focuses on overcoming fear through willpower and force. I look at fear differently because I believe that what you resist persists. So if you try to ignore your fear or any uncomfortable emotion you're feeling about asking, you're really trying to just squash that energy down and lock it away somewhere inside your body. The feeling doesn't disappear. The energy of that fear is still there, triggering your body into a stress response. And when we're stressed, the emotional part of our brain naturally becomes much louder than the rational part. So instead of trying to push fear away, I like to become curious about it. I simply pause, I acknowledge what I'm feeling, and I gently explore what's underneath it. You might ask yourself, what am I afraid of? Why is that important to me? How is this fear trying to protect me? I really love that last question because it completely changes our relationship with fear. Instead of seeing fear as the enemy, we begin to recognize that it's often trying to protect us from getting hurt. When we understand that, the fear usually becomes quieter. It may still be there, but instead of feeling like a blaring fire alarm, it becomes more like a warning light on the dashboard. It is simply giving us information. If you'd like to release some more of that emotional energy physically, you can try shaking out your arms, going for a walk, or doing some other form of gentle movement. Moving your body is a wonderful way to help emotions move through you as well. But don't miss the opportunity to learn from what you're feeling. Your emotions often contain valuable information about your beliefs, your needs, and what really matters to you. And that's all part of developing greater self-awareness. Step 3. Ask clearly and directly. Once you've become clear about what you need and you've acknowledged the fear, the next step is simply to ask clearly, directly, without hinting. This is one of the biggest communication traps I see. Instead of asking directly, we drop hints. We hope, we imply, we assume the other person will join the dots. But dropping hints is really just expecting someone else to read our mind. And as we've already talked about, people can't do that. Most of us hint because we're afraid to ask. I understand that fear. I've lived it. But I also know that hinting is one of the least effective communication strategies we can use because it almost never creates the outcome we're hoping for. Instead, ask clearly and directly for what you want. For example, instead of saying, "The rubbish bins are getting pretty full," try saying, "Are you able to take the rubbish out tonight, please?" Can you hear the difference? One is a comment. The other is a request. A clear request gives the other person something they can actually respond to. They're not left wondering what you meant or trying to interpret your mood or making assumptions about what you're thinking. Clear requests reduce confusion. They reduce overthinking, and they make healthy communication so much easier for everyone involved. There's another gentle shift that I've found which makes asking feel even gentler, and that's what we'll look at next. Step 4, ask as a favor, not a demand. Here's another small shift that I've found makes a surprisingly big difference. Instead of thinking about asking someone to do something, think about asking them for a favor. Asking for a favor feels easier to most people. It's less formal, it's warmer, and it changes the whole energy of the conversation. Compare these two approaches. Can I ask you to do me a favor, please? Compared with, can you do something for me? Or, I need something from you. Can you feel the difference? Most people don't feel threatened when someone asks them a favor. The other two statements often create a subtle sense of defensiveness, almost as though they need to brace themselves for something difficult or demanding. The beautiful thing about asking for a favor is that you're giving someone the opportunity to help you. You're inviting cooperation. You're not issuing instructions. Most people don't enjoy being told what to do. It's human nature to push back a little. But generally speaking, the people who love you genuinely want to help you. Sometimes they simply don't know how. When you ask for a favor, you're opening the door and giving them that opportunity. Here are a few simple starter phrases you could try. Can I ask you a favor, please? Could you do something to help me, please? Or, I'm struggling to solve a specific problem. I would really appreciate your help with, and let them know a specific way they can help. Coming back to the value of being clear, being specific about what the other person can do to help you makes it easier for them. They don't have to try and work out what to do or what you want. Step 5, explain why it matters to you. This is probably the step that many people don't know about, yet it is something which makes our request much more likely to be received well by the other person. Most of us want to make the people we love happy. So if they understand why your request matters to you, they're much more likely to understand it, and they're much more likely to respond positively. Think about it from their perspective. What seems important to you may not automatically seem important to them, not because they don't care, but because they're living life through their own experience, priorities, and perspectives. That's completely normal, so help them understand. Explain how this small favor would make your life easier, how it would reduce your stress, how it would help you feel calmer or more supported or more connected. When people understand why something matters to you, it often becomes important to them too. I really love this step because it reminds us that healthy communication isn't about convincing someone. It's about helping them understand our experience, and understanding creates connection. Step 6, remember that no isn't personal. Finally, let's talk about the word that so many of us are afraid of, no. For years, I avoided asking because I was afraid someone might say no. Perhaps you felt that too. But here's what I've gradually learned. If someone says no to your request, it doesn't automatically mean they don't love you. It doesn't mean you don't matter. It doesn't mean you've done something wrong. And it certainly doesn't mean you're unworthy. It simply means you've asked a question and they've given you their answer. People say no for all sorts of reasons. Perhaps it's a not now, or they're tired. They may already have other commitments. They may not know how to do what you've asked, or perhaps they simply can't do it. Most of those reasons have far more to do with their circumstances than they have to do with your worth. If someone says no and doesn't offer another option, you don't have to end the conversation there. Instead of asking why, which can sometimes feel a little confrontational, try asking something like, what would work better for you? Or could we find another solution? Those questions invite curiosity. They invite collaboration. They communicate that you would like to look for a solution together. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about healthy relationships. They're not about one person getting their own way. They're about two people working together to understand one another and find a way forward where both people's needs are being met. When we approach our relationships with curiosity instead of assumptions, with honesty instead of hinting, and with clear requests instead of silent expectations, everything begins to change. And that's really what today's episode has been about. Not becoming more demanding, but becoming more honest and building meaningful relationships. Now, I have given you a lot of information in this episode. You don't have to do all of these steps perfectly right from the start. What I've given you is based on about 10 years of learning and practice for me. You can simply begin somewhere, maybe just with one part of this and build from there. Just know that every conversation you have is an opportunity to practice something new. As we come to the end of today's episode, I'd like to leave you with one simple thought. Learning to ask is one of the kindest things you can do for yourself and for the people you love. For so many years, I believed that asking was something to avoid. I thought it made me a burden. I thought it might upset people. I thought it would create conflict. What I've discovered is almost the opposite. Clear, honest requests remove guesswork. They prevent resentment. They create opportunities for understanding instead of misunderstanding. And they give the people who love us the chance to support us in ways they otherwise never could. The more clearly you communicate your needs, the easier it becomes for other people to help you. So I'd like to encourage you to remember this. Asking isn't a sign of weakness. It isn't selfish. It isn't demanding. It's a sign of self-awareness. It's a sign of courage, and it's one of the foundations of healthy relationships. Every time you choose honest communication instead of silent expectation, you strengthen your relationships. Every time you ask instead of hoping someone will guess, you create more understanding. And every time you allow yourself to receive help, you remind yourself that your needs matter too. I think that's something many of us need to hear. Healthy relationships aren't built on people guessing what we need. They're built on people feeling safe enough to ask and caring enough to listen. Before we finish, it's time for our just one thing. Because lasting change doesn't usually come from trying to change everything at once. It comes from doing one small thing differently. So here's my invitation for you this week. Take a moment to reflect on this question. What is one thing you've been hoping someone would notice that you haven't actually asked for? You don't have to answer right away. Just be curious and let it sit with you. Sometimes one honest answer to one simple question can begin to change a relationship, and sometimes it can change the relationship you have with yourself. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I truly appreciate you being here, and I hope today's conversation has encouraged you to be a little gentler with yourself and a little more courageous in your relationships. If you found this episode interesting or helpful, please remember to like and subscribe. And if you're listening on a podcast app, I'd be so grateful if you could leave a review. It really does make a difference. It supports me and it helps other people discover this podcast so they can benefit from these conversations too. Until next time, keep living midlife well. Aroha nui, much love. I'm Janine, and I look forward to connecting with you again on the next episode. Bye for now.